The headline is stark, and the internal danger facing Russia has never been higher. The question of whether the leader has lost control is no longer academic. It is a visible, terrifying reality that was broadcast to the world during his most recent major address. The Valdai Forum, which was meant to project stability and strategic genius, instead became a public confession of strategic paralysis. This failure of leadership at the center has created a vacuum that is now inviting chaos and conflict on the periphery. This is FPV Explainer, where we break down the most fascinating stories in drone warfare. If you're enjoying this deep dive, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us what topic you want to see next. Your feedback shapes our future videos and keeps us bringing you clear, detailed analysis from the front lines. The most immediate sign of this crisis is the leader's refusal to govern with a plan. His performance at the forum was dominated by evasion, inappropriate humor, and irrelevant historical tangents. His answers were empty, lacking any real substance regarding the future of the nation, the end of the war, or the stabilization of the economy. This is a crucial sign that the leader is no longer setting the national agenda. The crisis is setting it for him. He has lost the initiative to dictate policy. This phenomenon, where a leader is forced to address crises he has lost the power to resolve, is the political definition of a regime in decline. This is fundamentally a loss of financial control. The massive and necessary tax increases that are coming are not being implemented because the leader woke up and desired them. They are being implemented because the economy is in such a severe state of collapse that there is no other way to fund the colossal growing budget deficit. The financial system is forcing his hand. This simple reality that he is compelled to announce painful economic measures to his people, not out of choice, but out of absolute economic necessity, proves he has lost control of the budget. The nation is being driven by financial imperatives, not by political will. The leader's historical commentary served as a damning illustration of his state of mind. His astonishing attempt to justify the invasion of Poland in 1939 by arguing that Poland was to blame for its own fate because it refused to concede territory to Nazi Germany was not just a diplomatic blunder, it was an act of profound psychological projection. It confirmed that the leader sees himself as the current-day aggressor, willing to justify historical crimes to rationalize his current aggression in Ukraine. This grotesque self-incrimination undermines the entire national myth of the Great Patriotic War he uses to maintain his domestic legitimacy, accelerating the collapse of his political authority. This lack of strategic clarity and commitment to historical lies is creating a dangerous vacuum of leadership. The military and business elites who looked to the leader for signals of certainty and stability were offered only jokes and evasions. The lack of a clear, concrete plan for ending the war, for stabilizing the financial markets, or for reforming the failing military structure is a terrifying signal. The absence of a clear strategy is a vacuum that accelerates the erosion of both public trust and elite confidence, which are vital components for an autocratic regime's survival. This political weakness at the center is the very thing that enables conflicts and power struggles in the volatile periphery, such as the open confrontation that has now erupted with the leader of Chechnya. The overall impression is one of a regime that is paralyzed and unraveling.
We have identified the crisis of leadership at the center of the Russian state, a vacuum created by the dictator's public failure to plan. But the consequence of that vacuum is a spectacular collapse of authority on the periphery. The focus now shifts to Chechnya, where the self-styled Little Tsar is experiencing a rapid and profound erosion of power. The formidable aura of fear and invincibility that was meticulously built around the Chechen leader has now completely dissipated, revealing a figure who is dangerously exposed and vulnerable. This decline is not just political, it is visible and physical. The Chechen leader's widely publicized and undeniable health issues have stripped him of the single most valuable asset in his political arsenal, the perception of absolute brutal strength. In a culture where power is synonymous with physical dominance, the sight of the leader appearing unwell, bloated, or struggling is a direct signal of weakness. This visible vulnerability has immediately fueled speculation about his succession among his rivals, both within Chechnya and among the competing clans who are waiting to seize power. This lack of perceived physical strength directly undermines his entire power structure, making him a less reliable and more vulnerable ally in the eyes of the Kremlin. This disintegration of his authority is most pronounced in the military sphere. His once untouchable private security forces, often dispatched to carry out extrajudicial acts, kidnappings, and political intimidation across Russia, are now effectively grounded. The central Russian security apparatus has subtly but deliberately clipped his wings. Following several high-profile incidents where his operatives were involved in criminal actions outside Chechnya, the message from Moscow has been clear: your activities must be strictly confined to your republic. This withdrawal of the license to operate outside his domain proves that the central government has curtailed his power, making him a shadow of the fear-inducing figure he once was. This enforced limitation on his power is a direct consequence of the war in Ukraine, which has exposed the fragility of the Russian military and forced the Kremlin to confront internal chaos. Furthermore, the foundation of his power is not self-sustaining. It is built entirely on a massive, precarious financial subsidy from the federal budget. Chechnya remains one of the most financially dependent republics, relying on tens of billions of rubles in annual federal subsidies. This financial lifeline, which funds his extravagant lifestyle and his extensive personal security forces, is now increasingly precarious. The economic crisis gripping Russia, coupled with the rising political opposition in Moscow, who resent the massive, unearned subsidies, makes this financial arrangement unstable. The Chechen leader is economically dependent on the same failing central government whose authority he constantly challenges. This paradox accelerates his political vulnerability, as his power base is financed by the same structural weaknesses that are now bringing the entire Russian economy to its knees. This systemic decay sets the stage for the inevitable public confrontations that are now defining the new reality of Russian political life. The leader's own actions, such as his enraged, delayed response to the renaming of the Cossack villages, are a clear, desperate sign of his failing grip. He is trying to conjure the terror of his past self, but the lack of immediate, overwhelming action from his forces confirms to everyone, from the Z-bloggers who are now openly mocking him, to the rival generals who are eyeing his position, that the Chechen leader's era of untouchable power is rapidly coming to an end. This loss of fear in the periphery is the most dangerous sign of a central government that is utterly failing to maintain control.
We've dissected the profound crisis of leadership at the center of the Russian state. That weakness has now metastasized into a direct public confrontation on the periphery, a political test of wills that has exposed the complete decay of the Chechen leader's power. The infamous clash between the Chechen leader and General Colonel Vladimir Shamanov was not just a feud, it was a desperate, failed attempt by the Chechen leader to reassert his crumbling dominance, resulting in his total humiliation before the entire pro-war establishment. The conflict began with a seemingly minor political maneuver, the proposal to rename historical Cossack villages within the Chechen Republic. This was correctly identified by Russian nationalists as a calculated act of de-Russification, a move to erase Russian historical presence and heritage from the region. This was a political third rail, a direct challenge to the central government's narrative of unity. The challenge was taken up by General Colonel Vladimir Shamanov, a highly decorated military hero and former commander of the VDV, Airborne Forces. Shamanov's criticism, delivered publicly from the floor of the State Duma, was clear, blunt, and voiced the profound resentment of the entire Russian nationalist and veteran community. He dared to say what no one else would, that the Chechen leader's actions were an insult to Russian history.
The response from Grozny was immediate, furious, and strategically disastrous. The Chechen leader, relying on a playbook that had always guaranteed instant submission, launched a vicious personal attack. His public post, seen by millions, was an outrageous challenge. He demanded that the respected General Shamanov stand on his knees and ask forgiveness for alleged crimes against Chechen civilians during the past wars. He went further, making the unforgivable sin of linking Shamanov's name to that of Yuri Budanov, a convicted murderer of a Chechen girl, a symbol of the worst brutality of the Chechen wars. This was the Chechen leader's attempt to use political terror to silence his critics. He expected the general to issue a humiliated video apology within 24 hours, as had happened countless times before. But times have changed. The expected submission never came. Instead, the Chechen leader's rage exposed his own catastrophic loss of influence. The reaction from the powerful Z channels and military analysts was not silence or support for the Chechen leader. It was universal condemnation. These influential pro-war voices, the same ones who previously feared the Chechen leader's retribution, openly defended Shamanov. They called the Chechen leader's threat a phenomenal mistake, a profound act of disrespect to the Russian military, and a sign that the central government has lost its ability to enforce order on its most volatile periphery. This public repudiation confirmed that his aura of invincibility has been broken. This failure of political control is a massive systemic warning. It proves that the Chechen leader's power is no longer absolute, and that the astronomical federal subsidies he receives, over 70 billion rubles annually, have bought only tenuous loyalty. The open defense of General Shamanov by the military community is a clear indication that a line has been crossed. The political humiliation is complete, because the man who threatened a general with a tribunal has instead found his own power structure publicly challenged and his authority neutralized. This conflict is the visible manifestation of the structural rot in Russia, accelerating the risk of a Third Chechen War and interregional violence once the central government's control fully collapses.
We have meticulously analyzed the political miscalculation that defined the public humiliation of the Chechen leader. But the true, horrifying consequence of that loss of face is the immediate, escalating danger of a Third Chechen War. A potential internal explosion that would guarantee a strategic collapse of the Russian war effort in Ukraine. This is no longer a fringe fear. It is the inevitable outcome of a Kremlin that has sacrificed stability for cheap political expediency. The entire structure of the Chechen leader's power is a massive destabilizing financial and ideological anomaly that the central government has long chosen to ignore. This anomaly is now coming home to roost. The first source of this inevitable conflict is financial resentment. Chechnya is sustained by astronomical federal subsidies, hundreds of millions of dollars annually, resources that are viewed by other Russian regions and the nationalist elites as corrupt payoffs. The current economic crisis, driven by the war in Ukraine, has made this financial life support system a major point of friction. The moment the central authority falters or the Chechen leader's health fails, the spigot will be turned off and rival groups will instantly compete to seize the financial spoils, initiating chaos. The second source of instability is the ideological resentment over derussification. The conflict that erupted between the Chechen leader and General Shamanov over the renaming of Cossack villages is not an isolated incident. It is a visible manifestation of a deep ideological hatred. Russian nationalists and veteran communities view the systematic erasure of Russian historical presence in Chechnya as a profound act of betrayal. This deep-seated anger is a ticking bomb. The moment the Chechen leader's absolute control is removed, either by a Moscow purge or by his health failing,
The vacuum will be filled by rival clans and security forces who will engage in violent internal power struggles. This is the powder keg scenario. Internal clan conflict combined with the deep ideological anger of the Russian nationalist bloc, which views the Chechen leader's control as a national humiliation. The ultimate danger is the potential for this localized chaos to metastasize into interregional war. Should the violence erupt, the Russian military would be forced to divert critical resources, the very same high-value VDV and Marine units they are struggling to keep on the front lines in Ukraine to fight an internal, urban, and deeply complex counterinsurgency. This would instantly open a massive internal front that the Russian military cannot afford. It would guarantee a complete and immediate collapse of the war effort in Ukraine, as troops would have to be pulled from the trenches to fight within their own borders. The conflict between the Chechen leader and the military establishment is the final clear warning that the center has lost control. His public threat to send a decorated general to a tribunal proved that the Chechen leader believes he operates above Russian law. This public display of defiance is a structural crisis that guarantees the instability of the entire system. The threat of a Third Chechen War is not a political rumor. It is a guaranteed consequence of the Kremlin's failed strategy to maintain control through fear and corruption. The loss of control at the center has unleashed the dogs of war in the periphery.
We have meticulously analyzed the collapse of leadership, the erosion of the Chechen leader's authority, and the open humiliation of a decorated general. But the final, most devastating conclusion is this: the public conflict between the Chechen leader and the military establishment is not an isolated incident. It is a clear final warning that the Russian system is structurally disintegrating. The center has lost the will to enforce the law, and the chaotic periphery is ready to explode. The public feud is a perfect microcosm of all of Russia's systemic failures. It synthesizes the most destructive elements of the regime: financial corruption, the massive, unsustainable federal subsidies that fund the leader's power base; ideological rot, the Chechen leader's brazen demand to erase Russian history in the form of Cossack village names; and military impotence, the central government's visible fear of its own regional proxy. The fact that a powerful general was publicly threatened with a tribunal and commanded to kneel without the threat being met by an immediate, overwhelming federal response proves that the Kremlin is too weak and too fearful to impose the rule of law on its own territory. This political paralysis is the ultimate sign of a regime that has lost control of the fundamental mechanisms of the state. The most dangerous consequence of this exposed weakness is the inevitability of violence. The Chechen leader's health is failing, his political influence is waning, and beneath the surface, rival clans and internal security forces are waiting to seize power. This situation creates an unavoidable vacuum of violence. The moment the central authority falters, or the Chechen leader is removed, the ensuing internal power struggle will not be a peaceful transition. It will likely escalate into a chaotic, massive internal conflict, a Third Chechen War that Russia is utterly unprepared to fight. The ideological resentment from Russian nationalists, who view the Chechen leader's special status as a national humiliation, combined with the financial desperation of the rival clans, will act as the perfect fuse. This looming internal war is the final strategic threat that makes the entire campaign in Ukraine unsustainable. Any large-scale internal conflict would instantly guarantee the failure of the war effort in Ukraine. The Russian High Command would be compelled to pull its remaining professional troops, the VDV and the Marine brigades, currently fighting on the front lines, to fight a civil war within its own borders. This immediate diversion of resources would grant Ukraine a decisive, irreversible victory. The internal rot is the final strategic threat
that the Kremlin provoked and is now incapable of containing. The ultimate judgment on the Russian leadership is that they have built a system so reliant on personal loyalty and corruption that it cannot survive a single challenge to its authority. The open condemnation of the Chechen leader by the Z community, the very people who once feared him, is a testament to the fact that the old rules no longer apply. The stability of the Russian Federation is now hanging by a thread, and the collapse of the center's authority is inviting the final, chaotic act of self-destruction.